Welcome back to the United Tastes of America podcast series from iHeart. I am Rick K. Jones, your host for this series. Today we find ourselves on Rocky Top in the volunteer state of Tennessee. Tennessee is a state that really played a big role in my life. In my early 20s, I was fortunate enough to be the head soccer coach and head basketball coach at a small college in Tennessee, at the University of the South in Suwannee, Tennessee. Suwannee, very prestigious school. A lot of people know it from the Suwannee Review, one of the great literary magazines. Suwannee was actually started as a university by Anglican bishops and ministers, Episcopalians that were all Confederate soldiers. That's why they called it the University of the South. A lot of people don't know this, but Suwannee was a founding charter member of the Southeastern Conference. One time, tiny Suwannee was in the SEC. If you've had a chance to go to the mountain, it is one of the most beautiful campuses you'll find anywhere in the country. Just a wonderful place. And my time at Suwannee, spent a lot of time throughout the state recruiting kids, playing games in different cities, different towns across Tennessee. Two of my very best friends live in Tennessee. Ron Cook, one of the finest men I know, born and raised in Nashville. Dad was the dean of men at David Lipscomb. Ron's lived there his whole life. He and his wife Peggy are really, really good friends. We spent a lot of time in Nashville. And then my buddy Gordon Whitener, his wife Susie, are over in Knoxville, Tennessee, and had a chance to spend a lot of time in that area too. I've been very fortunate to have worked with a lot of great coaches that were in Tennessee. Rick Byrd, late Don Meyer, who was at David Lipscomb for years, a number of other people that played a big role in my life. So the volunteer state, it's been really, really important to me. Now, how did it get its name? Why is Tennessee the volunteer state? Well, it was really because of the large number of men who volunteered for military service in both the War of 1812 and later the Mexican-American War. And hence it became the volunteer state. Tennessee originally was part of the North Carolina colony. Remember, we talked to you earlier, North and South Carolina were one colony until in the mid-1700s when North Carolina split off, and Tennessee was an extension of the North Carolina colony. It was originally explored by Virginians and Carolinians, and many of them settled there. We've talked in the past about how the Revolutionary War was fought for a number of reasons, but one was that the Brits were trying to prevent us from what we call manifest destiny or going west. Tennessee largely was west of the Appalachian Mountains, and a lot of settlers came there and spent time there. And finally, Tennessee became the 16th state in our union in 1796 as an independent. Who settled Tennessee originally? A lot of Scotch-Irish. We've told you a little bit about the story of Scotch-Irish. These were men and women, families from Scotland, and they were Protestants. And the first thing that the British did was move them to the Ulster area of Ireland. Again, England is trying to colonize Ireland largely Catholic. And so they try to put these Scotch-Irish, plant these Scotch-Irish in Western Ireland, and hence the term plantations, planted people. Didn't work out for them there. They were persecuted, and so many of them migrated to the United States, and they migrated to land that looked a lot like the land that they had come from in Scotland. And so the whole Appalachian belt, and the Appalachian Mountains run from Maine to Georgia. Throughout that, was settled by a lot of the Scotch-Irish. And in eastern North Carolina, you had a significant number of what we call mountain people, Appalachian people, Scotch-Irish people. And it played a big role in music, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But they brought with them their own kind of food, their own kind of culture, their own kind of music. Andrew Jackson became the 7th president of the United States from 1829 to 1837. Jackson actually wasn't born in Tennessee. Andy Jackson was born in South Carolina, in Waxhaw, South Carolina, but he moved to Tennessee early, became a legislator, a lawyer, and, became famous for the War of 1812, Battle of New Orleans. There was a song about that. In 1814, we took a little trip down the Mississippi. Let's see how that goes. In 1814, we took a little trip down the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. What a lot of people don't know is we had already won that war. The British had already surrendered before that war was actually fought in the New Orleans area there in 1814. When you look at the agriculture of the South, South Carolina was, especially the coastal area, was producing rice. Tobacco was such a huge crop in the Carolinas, in Virginia, in Maryland, in southern Kentucky, and then there was king cotton. Cotton in South Carolina, in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. Tennessee uniquely grew more crops, more food products. You can't eat cotton, you can't eat tobacco. And they grew a lot of crops. And so in many ways, Tennessee was the breadbasket of the South in so many ways. It was one of the states that actually grew wheat. That wheat became flour, became biscuits, which we'll talk about later. Grew a lot of corn, which became cornbread and cornmeal and grits and those types of things. So Tennessee was very, very important. It was a very divided state in the Civil War because when we talk about Tennessee, we really talk about 3 regions: Eastern Tennessee and the mountains, the Central Plains of Middle Tennessee, and then the Delta area around the Mississippi River down by Memphis. The mountain people were adamant about staying in the Union. Again, they didn't own big plantations. They didn't own slaves. They were hardscrapple. They were making a living any way that they possibly could and felt like they were proud to be Americans. And so you had a pocket of that Eastern Tennessee region that never became part of the Confederacy, at least philosophically, never became part of the Confederacy, while the rest of Tennessee certainly did. There were lots of bloody and memorable battles in the Civil War in Tennessee, places like Shiloh and Lookout Mountain, Franklin, Cumberland Gap. These were all major battles. A lot of men died on both sides, Union and Confederate. And then after the war, Tennessee really had economic struggles. But what turned the table for it was really electric power. The Tennessee Valley Authority produced from the water, from the rivers, largely the Tennessee River, a lot of hydroelectric power that was distributed throughout the South. And that provided energy for much of the South and a significant amount of wealth for the state of Tennessee. We mentioned the mountain people. Tennessee is really the historic home of country music. The first country music albums were actually pressed and produced in Bristol, Tennessee. And that's where the famous Carter family was recorded for the first time. But then Nashville really became the epicenter for country music. There was a barn dance, a weekly radio show, and it followed a show from the Metropolitan Opera. So you had the Metropolitan Opera out of New York with a radio show on Saturday night. from 7 to 8 p.m. And then they followed it with this basically hillbilly country music. And somebody famously said, well, it's not the opera, it's the Opry. It's the Grand Old Opry, and the name stood, stood the test of time. This was a radio show from one of the great 50,000 watt radio stations, WSM Radio in Nashville. They were owned by the National Life and Accident Insurance Company, and WSM is an acronym for the term We Shield Millions. In other words, as an insurance company, we're protecting millions of people. And the old WSM barn dance became the Grand Ole Opry in October of 1927. And so think about it, 100th year of the Opry, which is pretty amazing when you think about that. The original host was a guy named George Hay, and he was the person that coined the term the Grand Ole Opry. Later, a very famous country music announcer named Ralph Emery was the host from the 1950s to the early 1970s. And then they had a host that you may have heard of, a guy named Pat Sajak, who later became the person that led Wheel of Fortune, the great Pat Sajak. Tennessee is going through a renaissance right now. It's one of the fastest growing states in the union, largely because it doesn't have state income tax. And it's very, very business friendly. And it's amazing the number of businesses that have relocated to Memphis, to Knoxville, but primarily to the greater Nashville area. And Nashville is really a boom town right now. And the state of Tennessee is growing like weeds. When you think about food in Tennessee, you really think about those three distinct regions, that eastern mountainous region, the middle part of the state, and the west, which is really called the Delta. I kid people about the west. I'll tell people that really Memphis is the capital of Mississippi. It's not even in Mississippi, but it's the largest city in that Delta area, and it's kind of the springboard to the places in the Delta. And because of this, you've got a real diverse culinary state in so many ways. The East is mountain food, as we've mentioned. Moonshine. They make a lot of corn liquor in those places. A lot of those counties were dry counties forever. And so the only way you were going to get liquor was out of a jar that somebody had made in a still in the woods not far from your little town. It's the place of mountain trout. It's home of chicken and dumplings. Chicken and dumplings is a classic mountain dish. You take an old hen or an old rooster, and then a little bit of meat and a whole lot of dumplings could feed a family in a big, big way. A lot of country ham produced in eastern Tennessee. They're famous for butter beans, cornbread, buttermilk. My dad, who was from Atlanta, he loved what he called cornbread and butter beans, big white dried butter beans. He would pour buttermilk on top of them and then put cornbread in and eat it all with a spoon. Kind of a mountain food, something he grew up with in Atlanta. Then you get to the middle part of the state, and the middle part of the state of Tennessee is really famous for what we call the meat and threes, the great, cafeterias or diners where you can get a choice of meat, 3 vegetables, some sweet tea, cornbread, maybe some biscuits. These are places like Arnold's or Puckett's or Manel's. Really, really great historic meat and threes from that. Middle Tennessee is famous for producing 2 really unique candies. In the Nashville area, they produce a candy called a Goo Goo Cluster. Goo Goo Cluster is peanuts, nougat, caramel, milk chocolate in a funny shape. It's like a nugget, Goo Goo Clusters. And then they produce the famous moon pies in Chattanooga, Tennessee, in a big way. On my other podcast, Shaboom, last year we had the famous Colonel Littleton on, who produces some of the finest leather goods anywhere in the world, from Linville, Tennessee, a little small town. When you order a briefcase, a $500 briefcase or a $1,000 a suitcase or a leather portfolio or whatever you order from Colonel Littleton, it comes beautifully wrapped, but he always includes a little moon pie as a lanyard, as a little something extra that you get. Nashville's famous for hot chicken. Prince's Chicken, Hattie B's, other places, very, very spicy chicken. It's also famous for banana pudding, believe it or not. There's a banana pudding festival in October in Centerville, Tennessee, which is one of the really fun festivals to go to if you like banana pudding. And then the West or the Delta region, the Memphis region of Tennessee, very famous for dry, barbecue. They have dry rubbed ribs at a very famous Greek restaurant called the Rendezvous. There's a place called the Cozy Corner in Memphis that serves barbecued Cornish hens that are just amazing. And then there's a very famous festival in Memphis that includes one of the largest barbecue festivals in the world called Memphis in May. They're also known for fried catfish. A lot of catfish came out of the Mississippi River and some of the tributaries. And so the western part of the state has a lot of fried catfish. But what would be the iconic dish that runs across all three regions would be homemade biscuits. And homemade biscuits in Tennessee are just a way of life. And remember, this was one of the few southern states where they actually grew wheat, in some cases, winter wheat flour. And there were a couple of big processing brands that produced wheat flour. Martha White, the famous Martha White, and White Lily flour were both. The beauty of biscuits is it's cheap. It's cheap to make. It'll fill you up. You can put a piece of ham in it, put a piece of cheese in it, put gravy on top of it. You can serve it with, butter and jams, all kinds of gravies, whole milk gravy, sausage gravy, red eye gravy. We'll talk about those. So how do you make a biscuit? Well, it's pretty simple. It's flour, it's whole milk or buttermilk, and then you cut in lard and or butter to get it to a fine, almost like a little grains that ultimately produces that butter, the layers of biscuits. And you like that because when they're baking, they kind of explode. And that gives it a really unique flavor. And you roll them out, you cut them, and you bake them. My grandmother, my daddy's mother, who lived across the street from me when I was a kid, she made homemade biscuits literally every day. Every day of her life, she got up in the morning and rolled out biscuits that you would have for breakfast, have them again for lunch, and then you would have them cold for dinner. She made scratch biscuits literally every day. She had a rolling pin, and I own my grandmother's rolling pin. It's one of my prized possessions to have my grandmother's historic wooden rolling pin that she made all those. And she cut her biscuits with a jar. She had a mason jar that she would use to make them the perfect size that were really, really good. We talked about gravies. Red eye gravy is very famous in Tennessee. That comes from country ham. The juice from country ham is blended together with black coffee, and it's just delicious. I love red eye gravy with grits on top of my grits. I like milk gravy or sausage gravy on top of my biscuits. I also like a biscuit that you can dip in a real nice runny egg and soak all that up. It's just about as good as you can get. So you can tell I'm excited about biscuits. Throughout Tennessee, there's so many great biscuits. When I was the basketball coach years ago at Suwannee, and again, this was a long, long, long time ago, on the way to Memphis on State Highway 64 was a place called Schrader's Truck Stop, and they made homemade biscuits at Schrader's. Great place to have breakfast with hot homemade biscuits. But probably my favorite biscuit in the world, and maybe the most famous biscuits throughout Tennessee, you will find at the Loveless Cafe in West Nashville. Now, Interstate 40 wasn't open for a long, long time. So Route 100 was the state highway between Nashville and Memphis. The Loveless Cafe is on US 100 or Tennessee 100, and it's very near where the Natchez Trace ends. The Natchez Trace is the old Indian Trail that's now a national road, national park road that runs from Natchez, Mississippi, all the way to Nashville. And if you have a chance in your life, you need to take a trip on the Natchez Trace because it's just spectacular. The land looks like it looked in the 1700s or 1800s. But it ends right at, literally dead ends, and Tennessee Highway 100 right at the Loveless Cafe. The Loveless Cafe was opened in 1951 by Lon and Annie Loveless. And they originally started selling fried chicken and biscuits out of their house. And they later expanded to be a full-service restaurant and a motor court. We call those motels, not hotels, because you would pull your car up literally to the door and get out, and that's where you would be able to stay. They still have the motor court there. They don't rent them out anymore. They use them for administrative offices and special occasions and those kinds of things. Y'all, the Loveless Cafe is probably the ultimate meat and three. I mean, they got, country ham, fried chicken, lots of vegetables, and those heavenly biscuits that they make virtually all day long. They serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner at the Loveless Cafe. And the consistency is at each meal you're going to want to eat homemade biscuits. It's one of my favorite restaurants in the world. It is the Loveless Cafe in Nashville. Again, they make them by hand with historic flours, with buttermilk, with butter, hand cut, bake them, serve them hot in a basket. They're just amazing. They also make their own jams and jellies at the Loveless Cafe, and you can get those. One of my other favorite restaurants in Nashville is believe it or not, is at the Omni Hotel, downtown Nashville. They have a restaurant called Kitchen Notes. The whole hotel is themed around music because of Music City. But the Kitchen Notes restaurant, they make homemade biscuits there too, but they use the jams and jellies from the Loveless Cafe, which is kind of neat. Again, the Loveless Cafe, Nashville, Tennessee, one of my very favorites. But of course, there's other great places to eat throughout the state of Tennessee, and I'm going to give you three from me for Tennessee. We mentioned earlier the famous Memphis barbecue, dry rubbed barbecue or barbecued Cornish hens, barbecue pork. But in Middle Tennessee, there's a very famous place called Martin's Barbecue. And Martin's Barbecue now has an outpost on James Island here in Charleston where I live. But the one in downtown Nashville is just simply fabulous. You go to the counter, you order from the counter, and you usually order by how much meat you want. And so you can get brisket, you can get pulled pork, you can get barbecue chicken, you can get ribs, you can get burnt ends, you can get all kinds of things. Martin's Barbecue's pretty special barbecue from the state of Tennessee and from downtown Nashville. Well, Tennessee's also the home of a whiskey made by a guy named Jasper Daniels, better known as Jack Daniels. And of course, Jack or Jasper Daniels supposedly learned to make whiskey from an African slave by the name of Uncle Nearest Green. And there is now a Nearest Green whiskey made close by Jack Daniels that is owned by a black entrepreneurial family. And they make a really, really good whiskey. If you like whiskey, try Uncle Nearest Green's whiskey. But on the Jack Daniels distillery is a restaurant. that's been there since 1908. It's called Miss Mary Bobo's Restaurant. And again, it's your classic meat and three. And you're going to want to eat the fried chicken. You're going to want to eat the meatloaf. You're going to want to eat chicken and dumplings. You're going to want baked chicken. And you're going to want one of literally dozens. You're going to want multiple vegetables from dozens of things that are there. Again, Miss Mary Bobo's Restaurant. When you go visit the Jack Daniel's Distillery in Lynchburg, Tennessee, you're going to want to eat there. And then one of my very favorite hamburger places is a place called the Elliston Place Soda Shop in downtown Nashville, not far from Vanderbilt University. They serve breakfast all day. And you want to get breakfast, or if you get in there for lunch or dinner, you don't want to eat a burger, but you need to save room for pie because they make homemade pies at the Elliston Place Soda Shop in Nashville. Maybe the best pies in America. You know, if you really want to do something, take about 4 friends and just order 4 or 5 different pies and take a bite and pass them to the next person. Just get a circle and, you know, eat an apple pie or pumpkin pie or pecan pie or peach pie or blueberry pie or lemon meringue pie, coconut cream pie or chocolate pie, and eat them all bite at a time. It's the Elliston Place Soda Shop in downtown Nashville. Just like the wonderful food we've talked about, our musical playlist from Tennessee this week is pretty wonderful too. We start with one of the great classic songs about Tennessee from the great Patti Page. It's called the Tennessee Waltz. It's a great, great country classic. And then we've got kind of a newer song from a legendary performer, Chris Stapleton, that you all know called Tennessee Whiskey. A wonderful song. There's a song about Memphis that I really love called Walking in Memphis by Mark Cohen. And then there's the classic that you hear every time you go to a Tennessee football or basketball game, Rocky Top, originally recorded by the Osmond Brothers. And then we've got a song from Alabama about Tennessee called Dixieland Delight. Just got a wonderful playlist today from the great state of Tennessee. So that's our show today from Tennessee, and the wonderful biscuits and more at the Loveless Cafe from United Taste of America. We'll see you next week from our 17th state in the Union, the Buckeye State, Ohio.